It was just before dawn when the officers arrived, their sirens cutting through the heavy mist like the warning growl of a storm. The sky was still dark, heavy clouds hung low, and the air felt thick with an unspoken tension. Ella stood at the window, her face pressed against the cold glass, watching them approach in slow motion. Her father, Cole, was somewhere deep in the house, always distant in the mornings, silent, lost in the labyrinth of his thoughts. She could hear the familiar creak of his boots on the wooden floor in the next room. The same boots that had once walked in blood-soaked deserts. He was home now, but never really home. Ella's heart pounded in her chest as she turned toward the door. "Dakota," she whispered, her voice cracking. She couldn't see her dog, but she could hear him barking frantically outside. Ella had always known Dakota would protect her. He always did, like he knew something about her pain, about the way she fought to hold everything together when it seemed like the world was falling apart. The officers were too close now. She could hear them shouting, demanding her dog back. But Dakota wasn't a threat. He was just a dog, her dog. Ella's fingers trembled as she clutched the doorknob. Before she could react, there was a sound, a sickening crack, the high-pitched yelp of Dakota, and then silence. The world paused. Then came the gunshot. In that instant, Ella knew. The man who had given her everything. Her father, a legend who had known the harshest corners of the world, was about to unleash a fury the police had never seen. He wasn't just her father. He was a force of nature. And today they would understand why. Ella's world tilted the moment she heard Dakota's last yelp. It was the sound of her childhood, the last thread of innocence she had clung to, severed in an instant. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, her body refused to move. She didn't understand it. Why would they shoot her dog? He was only protecting her, his protective instincts kicking in as they always did. She tried to pull herself together, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. She fell to the floor, her face pressed into the cool, rough carpet, the smell of the house. Wood, dust, something faintly metallic from the kitchen, overpowering her senses. Her father, Cole, had heard the gunshot too. He was already on the move, his boots thundering down the hallway with purpose. But it wasn't just his physical presence that terrified her, it was his silence. He moved like a shadow, his every step calculated, honed from years of training in places Ella could only imagine. He had always been distant, a man of few words, a man whose emotions were like the secret compartment of a locked box, never to be touched. When he entered the room, his face was unreadable, a mask of hard discipline. But there was something else, something flickering in his eyes, like a man facing a decision he never thought he'd have to make. Ella's voice trembled when she spoke. They shot him. Dakota's gone. Cole's eyes narrowed, his hand so often calm under pressure, clenched into a fist. There was no hesitation. He turned and walked toward the door. But before he left, he paused and spoke in a low, cold voice. "Stay inside. Don't move." Ella wasn't sure if it was the anger in his voice or the eerie calm that followed that made her legs finally work. She stumbled toward the door, her hand gripping the frame. She wanted to stop him, wanted to run after him, to scream that it wasn't right, that it wasn't his fight. But she knew deep down, this was his fight. And when a man like him fought, there was no room for mercy. The storm outside had grown fiercer by the time Cole reached the front yard. The rain pelted down in heavy sheets, drenching him within moments, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the officers who had crossed a line. His mind raced as he assessed the situation. The calm precision of years spent in Delta Force kicked in, guiding his every move. He didn't hesitate. He didn't pause to question. He was a soldier trained for this. His body had been hardened by war, by the loss, by the chaos of violence. And now, it was all rushing back. The taste of it was bitter, but it was real. Ella stood at the window, her hands trembling. She wanted to be brave, but the truth clawed at her chest. This was her father, a man who had always been the silent protector in the background of her life. Yet now, with the death of her dog hanging in the balance, she could see the man he was, the man she had never truly understood until now, the man capable of erasing everything that stood in his way, with a focus so sharp that the world might as well have been a blur. Outside, the officers, unknowing of who stood before them, made the fatal mistake of underestimating Cole. They shouted commands, their voices loud and demanding, but his eyes were already locked on them, cold and unyielding. Without a word, he approached. The first officer raised his weapon, but it was too late. The storm was his ally now, the sound of the thunder masking the deafening crack of Cole's movement. In a blur, the officer was disarmed, the weapon taken and thrown aside like it was nothing. The others barely had time to react before they were on the ground, subdued and incapacitated with the efficiency of a man who had spent decades mastering the art of warfare. There was no violence in it, no anger, just cold precision. Ella watched from the window, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had seen her father calm in the face of danger, never breaking a sweat, but this was something else. She had never imagined what it meant to be in the presence of someone who could bring an entire force to its knees in mere seconds. It was over before it even began. The officers were on their knees, their faces pale and stricken with fear. Cole didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His presence alone spoke volumes. The one thing they had failed to realize was that in his world, there were no second chances, no moments of hesitation. The weight of what they had done was clear. The life of Dakota, a dog they had no idea had been more than just a pet to Ella, now lay like a scar across their judgment. Ella finally opened the door, stepping out into the torrential downpour. Her hands were still trembling, her breath coming in short bursts. She looked at her father, unsure of how to react to the man who had in one moment redefined everything she thought she knew about him. Cole met her gaze. His eyes, once filled with steel, softened for a fleeting second. He knew what it cost her. He knew what it would cost him. And yet, there was no regret. Not in the way he looked at her, nor in the way he stood, waiting for her to speak. "I didn't want this," he said, his voice rough like gravel. "I never wanted to bring this life to you." Ella didn't know how to respond. She wanted to scream, to tell him how his actions would haunt them both, but she couldn't. The truth was, she had always known who he was, just never in such sharp detail. "You killed them," she whispered, her voice small against the roar of the storm. Cole nodded, his jaw tight. "Not killed. Just stopped them from hurting you." Days passed, and life began to settle back into an uneasy normalcy. But the damage was done. Ella couldn't stop replaying that moment in her mind. The sight of Dakota's body, lifeless on the ground, the officers helpless on the floor. Every detail haunted her. Her father remained distant, locked in his thoughts. He had never been the kind of man to talk about his past, his decisions. But now, in the silence, there was a weight between them that neither could escape. Ella wanted to ask him everything. The cost of his protection, the price of what he had done. But she knew she wouldn't get answers. She began to understand, in her own way, the heavy burden her father carried. To protect those he loved, to serve a cause bigger than himself, meant making impossible choices. It meant walking away from a part of your soul in order to keep others safe. And though she hated it, though the pain of losing Dakota would never fade, she finally understood why he did what he did. They were both survivors, in different ways. Ella stood at Dakota's grave, the rain still falling, but quieter now. The storm had passed, and the sun was beginning to break through the clouds, casting a soft light on the earth. She looked down at the simple stone marker, a symbol of the love she had lost. But as she stood there, she felt something shift inside her. The anger, the grief, it wasn't gone, but it was quieter now. There was a place for it, a place to hold it without letting it drown her. Her father joined her, standing beside her without a word. The silence was heavy, but not uncomfortable. They both understood the weight of what had happened. And maybe, for the first time, they understood each other. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered, her voice steady but full of raw emotion. Cole's response was simple, a hand on her shoulder, a brief squeeze. And as the sun broke through the storm clouds, a new day began. A day that, in time, would heal the wounds they carried together. But the legacy of that moment, of the sacrifice and protection that came with it, would stay with them forever. The weeks that followed the storm were quiet. Too quiet. The world outside seemed to have moved on, the whispers of what had happened growing softer as the days passed. but the air inside the house was thick with things left unsaid. Every room seemed to carry the weight of their unspoken thoughts, the absence of Dakota echoing louder with each passing day. Ella moved through the motions of life, but it felt like something was missing, like a piece of herself had been torn away. She caught herself looking at the door, waiting for Dakota to push it open, his tail wagging in the soft rhythm of their daily routine. But that rhythm was gone, and no matter how much she wanted to return to a time before, it was as if the world had rearranged itself, and she was standing in the middle of the wreckage. Her father had remained as he always was, distant, reserved, the man of few words. But there was a crack in him now, something vulnerable that he'd never shown before. When he looked at her, there was a flicker of something like regret, but his stoic expression quickly shielded it. He wasn't the kind of man to apologize. Not for things that were beyond his control, not for things that had been set into motion long before either of them had been born. But Ella could feel it. The silent understanding that they were both living with the consequences of choices made in the heat of anger and pain. They had always been survivors, but now it was as if they were standing on the edge of something neither of them could fully comprehend. It was late one evening, the air growing cool as night fell over the house, when Ella decided she couldn't keep waiting. The silence had become too loud. She needed to understand, needed to know the depth of what had happened, what her father had done and why. She found him in his study, the room thick with the scent of leather and aged paper. The weight of his presence filled the space, but it was the absence of his words that made her heart race. She stood in the doorway, watching him, unsure of how to approach the man who had once been a stranger, but now he was all she had left. "Dad," she started, her voice tentative. "We need to talk." Cole didn't turn, but he nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the edge of the desk in a way that made it clear he knew what she wanted to ask. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't look up. The silence stretched out, suffocating. "I know you think I should have left it alone. That I should have called someone else, reported it, made it right. But Ella, you have to understand. When they shot Dakota, when I saw him lying there, something snapped. I couldn't let them get away with it. Not after everything we've been through." His voice was low, barely above a whisper, but the weight of it was enough to make her step closer. Ella's chest tightened as she watched him finally look up, his eyes dark with the ghosts of his past. "I didn't want you to see me like that. I never wanted you to be a part of this world, the world I've been running for my whole life. I thought I could protect you from it, but I failed you." Ella's breath caught in her throat. She had expected anger, maybe more of his silence, but not this brokenness. She had never seen him like this. "Dad, I don't know what to say. I don't understand it. Why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you make them accountable for what they did? Why did you have to take matters into your own hands?" His eyes softened, and for the first time she saw him as a man, a father, a person who had lived through horrors she would never fully understand. He took a breath, his shoulders sagging. "Because I was afraid, Ella. I was afraid that if I didn't act, it would happen again. And I couldn't stand the thought of losing you. Losing anyone else." He paused, his gaze far away, and for a moment, Ella thought he might break. "I wasn't protecting you, not really. I was protecting myself. From the guilt. From the fear that I might be too late." Again, the room felt colder now, the shadows pressing in from all sides. Ella moved closer, the reality of her father's words sinking in. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man who had been forged by a world full of monsters, a man who had fought for things he couldn't save. She wanted to say something, anything to fill the silence between them, but the truth was, there was nothing to say. There was no magic phrase that could fix this. There was only the messy, imperfect reality of what they had both lost. "I never wanted you to see this side of me," he said, his voice barely audible now. "But I couldn't sit back and do nothing. I was trained for this, Ella. I was built to fight, and when they hurt you, when they hurt what mattered, I had to protect you." His words were edged with something raw, something real. "But I'm not proud of how it happened. and I'm sorry for that." Ella stood there, the weight of his apology heavy on her chest. She could feel her heart breaking, but not in the way it had before. It was different now, more quiet, more understanding. She wanted to say something that would make it all okay, but she knew there was no making it okay. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "You did what you thought was right," she said softly, her voice cracking. "But you didn't have to do it alone, Dad." He looked at her then, his face softening with the slightest hint of hope. He opened his mouth, as if to say something more, but the words didn't come. Instead, he reached out slowly, his rough hand brushing against her cheek. It was the most tender touch he had ever given her, and in that moment, all the anger and confusion faded away. She understood. He wasn't just a soldier, a killer, a man who had given up his soul to protect her. He was her father. And sometimes, in the mess of it all, that was enough. The days after their conversation passed slowly, the weight of what had happened still clinging to them like a shadow they couldn't shake. But as time wore on, Ella found herself looking at her father differently. The walls between them, built by years of silence and untold stories, began to crack. It wasn't instant, and it wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And in the quiet moments, when the world slowed down enough for them to breathe, Ella began to understand him in a way she never had before. The house, once filled with tension, was starting to feel like home again. She began to take long walks through the fields with her father, the sun setting behind them, casting golden light over everything. And slowly, they started to rebuild what had been lost. Not just the life they had once known, but the connection between them that had been fractured by violence and unspoken truths. Ella still grieved for Dakota. She always would. But in the quiet corners of her mind, she knew that the love they had shared was never truly gone. It had just been reshaped, reformed into something stronger, something that could withstand even the harshest storms. And as she walked beside her father, the weight of their shared loss, their shared healing, settled over them, no longer a burden but a bond, one that, despite everything, neither of them would ever break. The season began to change. The trees outside the house turned from their vibrant summer greens to the golden hues of autumn, and Ella noticed how much quieter it felt. The air was still, but it was the kind of stillness that felt heavier than the world outside the walls of their home. For the first time in years, Ella allowed herself to feel something other than pain. She let the weight of the loss settle into her chest like a distant echo, not as a wound, but as a scar that had already begun to heal. Her father, too, was changing. In the days since their conversation, Cole had let down his guard more than he ever had. The man who had been so solid, so unreachable, now seemed to be peeling away the layers of armor he'd built around himself. It wasn't just the softening of his gaze when he looked at her, or the way he started to speak more, slowly but with meaning. It was the way he would sit beside her at night, his arms folded, watching the rain from the window, as if finally letting himself remember the quieter moments of life. Those moments where he didn't have to fight, where he didn't have to be a soldier, where he could just be a father. But the most significant change, the one Ella hadn't been prepared for, came the night she saw him standing by the window, staring out into the dark, like he was seeing something far beyond the rain's streaked glass. "Dad?" she asked gently, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor. Cole didn't turn, but she could hear the weight in his sigh. "I've spent so much time fighting Ella," he said, his voice hoarse, a trace of regret in every word. "I forgot how to live, how to be human." He paused, his hands gripping the edge of the windowsill. "I should have been here, should have been present for you. I should have seen what I was doing." Ella's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. She wanted to reach out, but the words were tangled in her throat. The distance between them, once filled with anger and the silent shadows of war, was now filled with something else. Something softer, but still fragile. "Dad, we both messed up. But you didn't hurt me, not like you think. You protected me, even if it wasn't the way I wanted," she said, her voice steady, though her insides trembled. "I just want you to be here, with me. Not the man you were in the past, but the one I need now." Cole turned slowly, and for the first time, Ella saw the depth of the pain he carried, a lifetime of choices made in the heat of survival, now brought to light in his eyes. He stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking. "I've hurt you by being absent. By holding on to this weight I thought I had to carry alone. But I don't want to carry it anymore." The tears that Ella had been holding back for weeks finally began to fall. They weren't for Dakota, not just for him. They were for her father, for the man who had never allowed himself to feel, and who had now finally allowed himself to see what was right in front of him. He wasn't perfect. He was just human. "Maybe that's the first step, Dad," she whispered, her words caught in the tremble of emotion. "Maybe that's the only step we need to take." And in that moment she saw the truth in his eyes. He was ready. Ready to step into the future. Ready to heal alongside her. Ready to forgive himself. As the days passed, and the golden light of autumn settled into the cool silence of their home, Ella and Cole started to rebuild their relationship piece by piece. There were moments of quiet understanding, when Cole would sit with her at the kitchen table, telling her stories from his time in the force, stories she had never heard before, not because he hadn't wanted to share, but because he had never allowed himself to. He spoke of places she would never see, of people she would never meet, but the way he told those stories was different now. Softer, with the kind of vulnerability that only years of pain and healing could bring. Ella listened, not with the detached curiosity of a daughter who was just trying to fill in the blanks of her father's life, but with the deep understanding of someone who had finally begun to see him, not as a soldier, but as a man who had lived through the unimaginable and still carried the weight of that world inside of him. One evening, as the sky outside was turning dark and the wind was picking up, Cole came to her with a small, weathered box in his hands. He didn't say anything at first, just held it out to her, his face unreadable. Ella took it from him, the weight of it strangely familiar. She opened the box slowly, her heart in her throat, and inside was a small silver pendant, worn and scratched, but still holding its shape. It was Dakota's tag, the one he had worn all these years, the one that had been ripped away from him. "I couldn't protect him, Ella," Cole said quietly, his voice low with regret. "But I can protect you. From now on, I'll make sure you never have to face things alone again." Ella took the pendant in her hands, her eyes blurring with tears. She didn't need the words. She didn't need the apology. In that moment, she realized something. Her father had been fighting for her all along, not just against enemies, but against the things he couldn't change, the things that had haunted him for so long. "I know, Dad," she whispered, holding the pendant close to her heart. "I know." As winter crept closer, the house began to feel like a home again. There was no grand transformation, no sudden fix to the things that had been broken. It was a slow, steady healing that began in the small moments. The morning coffee they shared in silence, the long walks they took together, where words weren't necessary. It was in the way they both slowly began to heal, not just from the trauma of the past, but from the scars they had carried for years. Ella still missed Dakota, more than words could say. But she had learned that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant carrying the love and loss with grace, learning how to move forward without letting it define her. And as for her father, Cole had found a way to be the man she needed him to be. Not perfect, but real. Not invincible, but present. One morning, as the sun broke through the grey clouds and bathed their house in a soft golden light, Cole looked at Ella. His eyes filled with something she hadn't seen before. Peace. And for the first time in years, she saw him not as the man who had fought wars, but as the father who had found his way back to her. They were not just survivors. They were a family, whole again. The sun rose, and with it, a new beginning. A Tronti-Dindwen time began to bend around Ella and Cole. The weight of the past, though still present, had begun to ease. Not through sudden catharsis, but through the steady rhythm of life they were creating together. Every morning, the sunlight would spill through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over the cluttered table, the half-empty mugs, and the quiet sounds of their routines. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They no longer spoke of the violence that had brought them together, nor did they speak of the silence that had once kept them apart. Instead, they moved together in this newfound peace, still tentative but real. But peace, as they both knew, had a way of being fragile, and the world had a way of reminding them that it would never let them truly forget the storms they had weathered. One evening, after dinner, as the wind picked up outside and the trees began to sway beneath the weight of the night, Ella found herself in the kitchen, her hands still covered in flour from the bread she had been kneading. Her father had gone out earlier, and she hadn't thought much of it. The house, for the first time in a long time, felt like it was simply hers, untouched by the ghosts of their past. But then the door opened, and Cole stepped in, his face tight, eyes distant again in a way that was all too familiar. For a moment, she thought she might see the man he had been, distant, burdened by the weight of decisions that could never be undone. But then something changed in his gaze, something deeper than the hardened silence. He had come back, and in his expression, there was something he hadn't said, something that tugged at Ella's heart. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he closed the door behind him and leaned against it, watching her as she wiped her hands on a rag. "Ella, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped a beat. She set the rag down slowly, her pulse quickening. There had been too many moments like this over the years. The moments when the silence would crack, when the weight of everything that had been left unsaid threatened to drown them both. But this time was different. She could see it in his eyes. Whatever he was about to say, it was important. She stepped toward him, her voice soft but steady. "What is it, Dad?" He took a deep breath, his shoulders tensing as if bracing himself for the words that were about to leave his lips. "I never wanted you to think I didn't care, Ella. But the thing is, there's more to the story. More that happened after that day. Things I didn't want you to know." Ella's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Her voice was barely a whisper now, filled with the raw uncertainty that had always existed between them. Cole hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching the space around him as if looking for the right words. "It's not about what happened with the police. It's about me, about the people I've crossed paths with. There's a network, Ella, a world I've kept from you, because I thought it was the only way to protect you." His eyes met hers, filled with a truth so raw that it almost felt like a confession. "I never wanted you to see it. But now, after everything, I think it's time you understood what I've been carrying." Ella felt the ground beneath her shift. "What do you mean?" "You've always been distant, but not like this." "What are you saying?" "I've been in the business of protecting people from the shadows for so long. I forgot what it meant to live in the light. But now, there are things I need to make right, people I need to face. And I can't do that alone anymore, Ella. I need your help. I need you to understand what's at stake here." The air in the room felt heavier now, the weight of his words pressing against her like an unseen force. But there was a new edge to his voice. Something that wasn't fear, but a kind of determination that she had never heard from him before. The man who had lived his life in the shadows was standing before her, asking for her help. "Why now?" she asked, her voice a mix of confusion and understanding. "Why after everything? After we finally found peace?" Cole looked away, his gaze falling to the floor. "Because peace has a price. And sometimes, the cost of it is greater than we realize. The people I've wronged, the things I've done, they've been following me, Ella. Waiting. And I can't keep running anymore." Ella stood there in stunned silence, the weight of his words sinking deep into her bones. Her father wasn't just a protector. He was a man running from a past that he had never fully confronted. And now it seemed, that past had come to collect its debt. "I thought you were done with all of this," she whispered, the disbelief thick in her voice. "I thought you wanted a life with me. Just us." Cole nodded slowly, his face a mixture of guilt and resolve. "I do. But there are things I left unfinished, things I can't ignore. I have to make amends, Ella. I can't keep running from the person I used to be. I owe it to you and to myself to face it." Her heart ached at the weight of what he was saying. The walls that had taken years to build between them had finally started to crumble, only for her father to reveal that the past was still lingering, waiting to reclaim him. She didn't know what to say, how to help him, how to make sense of it all. But one thing was clear: she couldn't let him face it alone. "I'll help you," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "But we do this together. No more running." Cole's face softened, a rare flicker of warmth in his eyes. "You're sure? After everything?" Ella took a deep breath, her heart filled with a strength she hadn't known she had. "I'm sure. We've already fought so much. We're not going to let this destroy us." Ella knew that the path they were about to walk would not be easy. There would be no more quiet mornings, no more simple afternoons spent in the safety of their home. The life they had built, fragile as it was, would be tested in ways they couldn't yet understand. The storm that had been gathering on the horizon was closer now, and it was up to them, father and daughter, to face it head-on. As the weeks passed, they began to prepare, not just for the reckoning that was coming, but for the realization that the world they had left behind was not so easily escaped. People would come looking for Cole, people who knew him from a time when his name had carried a weight that was dangerous and unforgiving. But for the first time, Ella saw her father not as a soldier, not as a man of violence, but as a human being, a man who had made mistakes and was finally trying to make things right. Together, they gathered the fragments of their past, stitching them together like a quilt, each piece telling a story of survival, of choices, of losses. And as the storm rumbled closer, Ella knew one thing for certain: whatever came next, they would face it together. The legacy of Dakota, of their shared pain, had led them here, to this moment of truth. And no matter what happened, Ella and Cole had made a choice to stop running, a choice to stand together side by side no matter the cost. And in that moment, as the rain began to fall, they understood the most important lesson of all: redemption is not a gift. It is a battle fought in the quietest moments, in the most unexpected places. And they were ready.